and that sometimes the experiences we can create can be detrimental, if not dangerous, to our democracy, to equity in our society, to so many things.
Noam, Segal, thank you for joining 20-Minute Leaders. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm good, thanks.
It's a wonderful pleasure. I'm addicted to thinking about user behavior and user research. So this is like an entertainment for me right now. These next 20 minutes, as if I'm watching my favorite TV show. I'm very excited. Where are you calling from right now?
I am in Mountain View, California, right by the Google headquarters.
Lovely. So I'm not going to do a service to you by reading the whole introduction. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your journey. But just for the ear, you were a lead researcher within Airbnb, previously in the IDC and the Air Force and a bunch of other companies along the way. Most recently now heading the user research at Wealthfront, a company that I deeply admire. Actually, I believe the founder of Wealthfront was one of my professors at Stanford about financials, and he's also about this. Noam, take me back. Why user research? Why user experience? And what is user research in its core?
Well, I would say, got into the realm of UX by chance. I was born and raised in Israel, though I sound suspiciously British because both of my parents are. And I served in the military in a unit within the Air Force, which is in charge of Israel's missile defense system. And when I left the army after 5 years or so, I joined Elbit, a company in Israel, which it builds a lot of things. It's part of the military industries. I joined the team building those same missile defense systems I was operating in the military. And my interest and my focus was on the user experience of those systems, except we didn't call it user experience at that point. And I didn't have that much expertise, if any, really, besides being an operator of these systems. And then throughout the rest of my career since then, I've mainly just been trying to build my expertise specifically around research. And so at some point I decided to leave Israel, move to the US, to central Illinois, amidst the cornfields of Illinois, and get my PhD in psychology.
Really?
And really level up my, and really level up my research skills that way. But at some point I realized throughout that my passions are tech and research, and the marriage of tech and research is the field of UX research. And so I'm really glad that I got to move to Silicon Valley, where I know you typically live as well, and work for these incredible companies, Airbnb, Intercom, and these days Wealthfront. Yeah.
What does it mean, though, to enter a company as a user researcher? Because at the end, the company, there's a bunch of different functions that you think of when you think of a startup or a big company, right? All the way from the research and development, all the way to the financials and to the strategics and the marketing. But the user research, user experience field, it sounds to me a little blurry about where that flies. Is it in marketing? Is it in research, in R&D? Where is that?
So a couple of things. First of all, the way I think of it is, and you know this, there is incredible talent here in Silicon Valley and across the US and Israel, of course. And there are also, these days we have access to every single imaginable resource we could need to build anything, right? Servers are cheap, and graphic cards are cheap, and memory's cheap, and we have tools coming out of our ears. We have so many tools.
Of course.
We have everything we need. But just because we have all of those resources and all of that talent doesn't mean we should just build anything. It doesn't mean every idea has equal value, and it doesn't mean that that idea will serve people. So we need to understand people. We need to understand how people think and how people behave and what attitude people have, because ultimately any successful startup starts with a problem, a deep, meaningful problem that possesses people and founders of those companies. And ultimately, when you solve that problem in a way that makes sense, thanks to, among other things, research, it makes all the difference in the world. And that's what creates incredible companies. Now, UX research is typically under one of two kind of organizational umbrellas to your question, either the design team or the product team, depending on the company. So I've reported into both. These days, my manager is the VP of design at Wealthfront, but I've also reported into product in the past. It really depends on the organization.
So what does the job actually entail? Because, a lot of people run by intuition when they're developing a product or they're thinking of a product. They're imagining what the user will want. They're taking that assumption and they're just developing based on that. What is the impact that a user researcher can have on an organization?
So the problem most founders tackle is that they are not their users. Sometimes, rarely, you may be your user, but usually you're not. And so you need to go to your users. This is something that Paul Graham famously told the Airbnb founders when they waltzed into his office for their weekly meeting where they went in Y Combinator. And he asked them, where are your users? And they told him, the 20 or 30 users we have at that point are all in New York, or they're mostly in New York. So he said, what are you doing here? Go to your users, go to New York, talk to them. And they realized so many things from that trip. One of them famously was that the places that the hosts were hosting in, their homes, their apartments, they weren't well photographed. And people weren't really getting to see and imagine the awesomeness of these places they could stay at. So Joe Gebbia, one of the founders of Airbnb, ended up photographing the host's apartments. And that was the beginning of a very important characteristic of Airbnb, which was beautifully presenting hosts' homes and apartments. And ever since then, and before then, whether it's at Airbnb or anywhere else, user researchers in particular have been going to users. And that can be done through a variety of methods, right? It can be done in normal times when we don't have a pandemic, in person, by traveling to users all over the world. It can also be done in much more quantitative ways, such as sending out a survey or watching users as they use a product. But whatever method it is, ultimately we go to our users because we recognize that we are usually not them, and we need to understand how they see things.
Right, and I believe that from the very small experience that I have in user research, and in my military service, I was responsible for building products that hopefully intelligence people will love using. And part of the challenge that I faced was going to these users, and I would know who my users are. They definitely weren't me, but I knew who they are, and I would sit with them, and I would ask them a lot. Hey, what do you need? Why is this difficult for you? What would you like to see? And there's the famous quote, right? If 100 years ago you would ask people what they need to get from point A to point B, they would want faster horses. So how do you tackle that, as a researcher, when the people that you're talking to don't even necessarily know what they want, and you almost have to, read between the lines and extract that aha moment?
That's exactly the point. We often talk about in our field that we are not trying to establish what people want. We are trying to establish what they need. And again, that all starts with a problem. We're not looking to people for solutions. We're not asking people who, have a carriage with a horse what they want, because they would say faster horses. What we're trying to understand is, the fact that you only have a carriage with a horse, what problem does that create in your life? Is that problem that, is it that you're not able to get from point A to B fast enough? Or is it something else, perhaps? And so I'm not sure what led, Ford and the original car makers to make the car, but I can imagine it's some of those problems. So the key here is where you keep your focus. And most research frameworks help you focus on the need and the problem, not what people want. Again, we have incredible talent here, amazing designers, amazing engineers. We can take care of that stuff. We just need to understand what the problem is, the underlying problem.
So when you approach a challenge, and I'm assuming that a lot of the times you're approaching these challenges and you have to start from scratch and you have to get to know what the product is, get to know who the potential users are, and get introduced to a whole new domain. What is your process? How do you go from A to Z in understanding to then give some concrete feedback to whether it's the VP product or VP design, whatever it is, on how this product should be actually, built or thought of?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a very collaborative process, and that's something that is just growing, I would say, in the research community. We work in cross-functional teams. We work with designers and engineers and PMs, and it's important to mention that. And we start broad, right? We look at the market, we look at the competition, we look at what exists today. We do lots of secondary research, not just primary research. So primary research is when you actually go to a user and ask them questions. But secondary research is just looking at what we know from academia, looking at what we know from competition, looking at what we know from a bunch of different things. And then usually we start more on the qualitative side by simply talking to people, because we don't know what we should even be asking them in the first place. We don't know what they're trying to tackle. For example, a few years ago with Wealthfront, this was about finances, right? This was about investing. You mentioned Andy was your professor at Stanford. It's one of the most popular classes at Stanford, I think, the class he teaches. And he realized that young people, especially, the sort of people that were his students at Stanford, didn't have access to investing tools, to the same sophisticated tools that used to be only, for the wealthy and the very well-to-do, right? Who would have imagined 10 years later that you could leverage tools like tax loss harvesting, even if you don't have $1 million in your investment account, So this is a paradigm change, or this was a paradigm change in investing, and just one of many examples.
Is this an industry that's evolving, the industry of user research and user experience? Do you see from when you started to where it is today, is it more popular, or have the methods evolved?
It's maturing a lot. So first of all, the experiences we're creating are so much more complex than ever before. We are able to build incredible software these days, but those experiences are very, very complex. And so more and more research is needed in order to craft them. We're also slowly but surely transitioning to completely new platforms that people have never experienced. My kids, who are 5 and 1 right now, they're not going to drive cars. And they're not going to use huge phones like I do, because there's a limit to how big you can make a phone screen. And they might live in some mixed reality, which I'm not sure exactly what it'll look like, but it's coming. And so you have more and more complex experiences. You have completely new platforms, up and coming platforms, which require a whole new understanding of human perception, human abilities, and new problems that these platforms can solve. And in addition, the field is maturing in other ways. For example, one of the things we've seen on the development side and the design side and the research side is the rise of ops, of operations, DevOps, design ops, research ops. As researchers these days, we have so many more tools and processes and things to take care of. And so the field of research ops has been really burgeoning in the past few years. And then one more thing I feel like I have to say is that I think we have also come to realize in the past few years, way too late, if you ask me, that we have great responsibilities in tech, and that sometimes the experiences we can create can be detrimental, if not dangerous, to our democracy, to equity in our society, to so many things. And so companies are thankfully investing more than they have before in doing that research as well, and making sure that platforms are accessible, making sure that things are more ethical than before, more equitable than before. That's another important component of what we do as researchers.
Wow. And obviously, being a user researcher at a wealth management company in that space, it's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of responsibility, not just for the company to continue succeeding and knowing its users, but it's also responsibility for knowing what the users actually need and how to create, delight moments that are actually beneficial to the users and not detrimental to them. And I took a lot of inspiration from one of the classes I had at Stanford by Floodgate. It was a venture capital class. And we were talking about these delight moments that a lot of companies are trying to create, and it seems that not all of these delight moments are actually beneficial to the users. They could be sort of artificial. They could lead them to behavior that's going to be bad for them in the long run. And I couldn't agree more about this. But this burden of responsibility that is seeming to just being of an exponential rise. This understanding, especially given what we've seen in the past few years. In all domains. Noam, what do you enjoy most? What do you love most about what you do? Which part of it?
Well, first of all, to your point, and I think this will answer your question, I've had some kind of strange experiences in my career. When I started working on the missile defense side, I was a small part of developing something that I hoped no one would ever use, which is a very strange experience, right? Building something you hope no one uses, because if they're using it, it means there's a war, and it means that your country and its people are in danger. So that was strange. And fast forward to today, I'm helping to develop a system where, unlike so many other systems these days, where it's all about engagement and making sure that people's eyeballs stay on a screen and watch more ads, perhaps. In our case, to your point, sometimes to do what's best for people, it's actually about not just delighting them, keeping them engaged with software. It's actually helping them avoid making mistakes and taking actions that could be detrimental to them. And to that end, I think what I love the most right now is just the foundational impact that research can have within an organization, and the foundational impact that a product like Wealthfront can have on people's lives. It's really, really meaningful. And it's
100%.
incredible to be part. Yeah, it's incredible to be part of that ecosystem and have even a small impact on the way things get built. We are, I think that, broadly speaking, in tech, and certainly at Wealthfront, we are trying to serve people. Our mission at Wealthfront is to put people above institutions, to serve people. And that's not something that has traditionally existed in the financial space or any space, really. And as someone who is obviously curious about people and understanding them, or I would not go through, the path I did, it's such a delight for me that we are more focused on people than ever before. And we truly just want to serve them. And I know that, we have rightfully in tech been criticized, certainly in the past few years, for many things that were absolutely wrong. And there's still so much to work on. But I'm a techno optimist. I am optimistic about our impact. I think that, broadly speaking, and certainly when it comes to what's in our hearts and what's in our minds and our intentions, we want to do great things. We want to impact people's lives in a positive way and give them access to tools that haven't existed before. And it's amazing when you think about it, when I think about education, because I have young kids, and watching them go through the education system now, there's still so much to do and so much to improve. And as I watch us going through a global pandemic, a terrible pandemic, which has cost way too many people's lives, I can envision all of the incredible things that are yet to come that could improve our healthcare system. And when I see companies like Uber and Lyft and other companies trying to revolutionize transportation, and I think about the future of kind of urban life and how we won't be, hopefully, wasting so much space on parking lots and parking structures and commuting and drunk driving and all of these things, if they become something of the past, that's an amazing thing. So I'm very excited, and that's the best part, I think, of being in my role and just in tech in general.
And I have to say that after this conversation, I'm even more excited than I was before. I consider myself a techno optimist, and I love that word. I haven't heard it before, and I'm adopting it. So thank you for that. And I'm energized by your vision and the way that you perceive and the shared responsibility that you outline here. That I really hope to take with me as well, along with whatever ventures I get to work on. Noam, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you very much for being so generous with your time. Before we leave, I have to apologize and put you on the spot one time and ask you for 3 words that you would use to describe yourself. And I have to put techno optimist as one of them. That's for sure.
Yes, techno optimist for sure. The second would certainly be extroverted. I am an extremely extroverted individual, and I am struggling to exist in a time when we are so disconnected from our friends and family and each other, which is part of why it's such a pleasure to talk to you. There are many reasons why it's a pleasure to talk to you, but that's one of them. Just to connect with other people is always fun. And the last one I would choose is curious. I have always been just a very, very curious individual. I think I credit that to my mother in particular, I think, of kind of gifting me with curiosity and a love of reading and a love of learning. And it's the main reason why I'm a researcher. I'm just a curious person.
Noam, this was such a pleasure. Toda rabba. Thank you very much. Continue doing good for people. And I can't wait to see what next things you do, because it's just remarkable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Toda rabba.